introduce Tom, who's is amazing. He's actually almost the father of the Agile, or grandfather of the Agile, or father of the Agile, when it was where you want to put it.
Grandfather's fine.
But also has been well recognized all over the world, and particularly by the BCS, because he's an honorary fellow, and out of 70 odd years, there's only about 160 honorary fellows. So they're a very rare breed, very special. So at this stage, pass across to Tom Gill. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. And thank you, my other sponsors, and welcome everybody, wherever in the world you may be. I'll catch up with the chat later. So first page. Now, at the top right, you will find the first half of this talk, which is focused on quantifying quality, like in requirements and objectives. And there is a video, and there are slides, and there's a book on it called Quantier. So that's already in the box. If you want the slides from today, you've got this QR, and you've got a link. And here's another link. You can hardly miss it. If you're serious, you're going to want the slides because there are lots of detail and lots of links. If you want to argue with me in private, feel free. There's my email, and I love to talk to people. Don't be shy. I love tough questions, and you'd be surprised at how quickly you'll get, I hope, interesting answers. So the subject today, part 2 of Quantifying Quality, is quantifying the quality of designs, variously called other things like the means to an end, the strategy, the architecture. It's whatever you do to reach your quality objectives. And with that, push on. So let's see if I can get rid of some windows that are in my way. We'll have to, okay. So first, 3 slides from the previous lecture, a clarification of what it means to quantify. Quantification is a special form of specification, and quite simply, if you quantify, you've got something, a number or something pretty close to it, for example, a bar chart, a graph, or something like that. And quantification is used in several phases of our work. One is estimation, a number guessing as how the future will be. Another is measurement. How is it right now, that quality level? And another, and actually my main emphasis initially, is neither of these. It is, in part 1, I was interested in specification. How do you specify qualities numerically so they're very clear and cannot be misunderstood? By the way, I have about 60 slides. So however detailed this slide looks, I cannot possibly afford more than a minute on each one, but I do hope some of you will study them later and share them and put them in your own lectures with a little bit of credit and whatever it takes. There's a certain class of people who are a little bit shy of metrics. Maybe they had problems with maths when they were smaller, or and just decided they dislike math, statistics, and all such things. And for one of them recently, I wrote some ideas down to try to encourage them to not hate metrics and numbers, but consider them a potential tool for good. I won't go through it in detail, but if you know someone who's like that and they need a little bit of nudging towards the idea of actually using numbers, here is a set of them. So, what are qualities? And here's from my competitive engineering book, free digital copy down at the bottom there. Here is requirements, and then all kinds of requirements. So qualities are a particular class of requirement and also particular class of system attribute. And in very simple terms, qualities describe how well the system functions, how user-friendly, how maintainable, how reliable, how transparent, how well. And it turns out the moment you say that how well, you're actually talking about a variable, more or less well. And by definition, that means there is the opportunity to put a number on the quality. And by putting a number on the quality, we achieve a state of clarity that permits a thing called engineering, as in software engineering, systems engineering, or quality engineering. So this is part 2 of a 2-part talk, as said, and the focus is on design, which has a number of synonyms, which just simply means whatever we propose to do and then do to try to get a certain effect on a scale of a value. Let's just say this is user friendliness, and design X gets us halfway to our goal from where we were in the past. And this is the basic idea of everything in this lecture, the idea that we can estimate, measure, quantify how good is a design with respect to any set of qualities. The tool I'm going to talk about is called an impact estimation table. And the basic idea is simple, that impact estimation will estimate the impact of a design on a requirement. And some of those requirements are qualities, not all of them. They could be, for example, a budget. Take an example of performance characteristic, which is not called a quality. And the tool, I've developed it myself through a period of my whole life practically, but I consider it a sort of Swiss Army knife in the sense that it has very many different applications or purposes, not simply one. And wandering through a Norwegian museum, which I recommend to you if you're here in Norway, I found this wonderful Swiss Army knife, large size, which is funny, isn't it? Okay. So the big idea here is quite simple. For any design or strategy or architecture or good idea or solution, how do we estimate how good it is for moving us from the quality levels we were at, let's call them the past levels, in the direction of incrementally, perhaps, if you're doing agile, towards our ultimate long-term goal level. And we have a special language for the impact called the percentage impact. And as it says down here, 0 means nothing happened. 100% means, wow, you got to your ultimate goal. And 50% means you got halfway. Wonderful. But what about the other half? Okay. So let's see, I think I will leave it at that. There's a lot more detailed comment here, but here's the summary. Somebody called this idea loading. Never heard it before, don't actually use the term, but I thought it was a nice little diagram. You know, how powerful is the idea? And the point is we're going to estimate, not only estimate initially, but we're going to measure ultimately as we do sprints or increments, what's happening incrementally, at what rate are we moving towards our goals. Now, here's a very busy diagram. What we're doing here, we have a group of people and entities called stakeholders, defined as those who have critical requirements we better listen to. And we have a set of the yellow arrows here are really the values, if you like, the qualities of interest for these stakeholders. They're represented by a little arrow. And over here, the light bulbs represent bright ideas. In other words, solutions, architectures, designs. By the way, I am talking about advanced design thinking in case anybody wondered, but far more advanced than what is traditionally called design thinking in our environment today. Anyway, the little lines connecting the good ideas say that, well, this idea connects to, healthy employees, which is like the quality of the organization. And healthy employees has three different stakeholders, and we can track the line and say one of them is hospitals, okay? Now, the point of this, if you think it's very busy and difficult to decipher, is that's exactly what it is. We'd like to understand these relationships. Digitally, we have the relationships in an app called Valplan, but if we write out this diagram, you can hardly follow the arrows, number one, because they're so tight. And number two, there's a little problem with the arrows, or the lines, better to call them, in that we don't know the magnitude. We don't know the effect of these good ideas on this goal. And we don't know to what degree the goal is satisfied for the three different stakeholders. And so it's nice, but it's not good enough. So we're going to introduce a tool to help that situation. Okay, so in summary, boxes and lines, and a lot of people use a lot of that to diagram their systems, have problems in mapping real, non-trivial systems. No problem in mapping trivial systems. But for example, the national health system. The map is not informative enough. It tells us we have a heck of a lot of complexity here, and we do digitally know the relations, and we can find them, but there must be a better way. Okay. Now, here is another view, but I've focused. Here are three different good ideas. This is actually planning for COVID, extend sick days, free vaccines, subsidize healthy food. They are trying to impact the stay healthy objective of the country, which in this case happens to be Norway. And the stay healthy objective is an objective that your doctor and the inhabitants have as stakeholders. So that's I'm trying to show there's a tripartite relationship here. So designs, or whatever you call them, impact values, or whatever you call them, like qualities, objectives, goals, things like that. And the values impact the life of the stakeholders. And so those previous charts are trying to map that. Now, the tool I'm going to show you will show that mapping, but it'll do it in the form of a table with numbers, is the big idea to differentiate it. Okay, so let's see, make sure I'm going in the right direction. Okay, here is one of these yellow arrows, which I told you is values. You could also call it a value requirement or a quality requirement. Okay, I have a separate book called Value Requirements. If anybody wants it, email me. I'll send you a free digital copy. Value requirements. I wanted to show you what we do. Now, it was discussed in detail in the first part one lecture, so I'm not going to go through it in detail. But for those who didn't attend it or need refreshing of the memory, here is an objective: get people where they need to go. Here's the top management spouting of the idea: important functions should not get affected by transport issues. Here are the stakeholders. Here is a scale of measure, which is my way of clarifying inequality. Here's where we are today. The state is 42% for health workers on buses. And here's the wish level, the desire of the stakeholder to get to 90% by, should be a different date. It isn't only one day later. Doesn't matter. This is actually a student exercise immediately pre-COVID, if you think about it. We knew it was coming. And here's the scale in more detail. Again, all of that part one of the lectures here. So long story short, we need a quantified target. We can't just have a target that says we should do stuff better. We need to put a number on it and a date on the delivery of that number. And then, and only then, do we have a foundation, a basis, a prerequisite for saying how good our design ideas are for that quality requirement. Okay? In other words, the whole thing I'm going to talk about today won't make any sense if your requirements are just wishy-washy words from top executives. You know, we need substantially better security. You can't do this. You need a quantified target to make sense. Now, I'm going to show you a table, mainly not to show the detail. We'll see plenty of detail in the rest of the talk here, but I'll show you the table to show you the structure of it, okay? So on the left-hand side at the top, we have what we call the stakeholder values. These are all quantified, qualitative things, most of them, but they are the values that the stakeholder holds. At the top, we have, in this case, two strategies, which could be alternative strategies, or they could be complementary strategies. Sometimes you don't know whether they are or must be, okay? The little bar charts and numbers in the middle are what we call impact estimates. They are estimates of the degree to which this strategy impacts moving from the previous level of the goal to the wish or future level. In this case, something like 25% or something like that, okay? Down here, we have only one in the example, but there could be any number of budgets and deadlines, including things like technical debt, to make it interesting. And down here, we have some computed value, I call them in simple terms, value for money ratios with regard to risks. We're going to go through all this in great detail in the rest of the talk, but notice what we have. We have multiple values. We can have multiple costs. We have multiple strategies, and we even have multiple characteristics of the efficiency of the idea. Some of them are efficiency with regard to risk of being wrong, and things like that. We're going to use these things down here to prioritize. For example, which one should we do first, or which one should we do instead of the other one. So here in the tool, which we're using to manage all this, if I click on the transport stakeholder level, because it's digitally coupled, I get exactly which of the values that the transport group is interested in. Here's another view of the same thing, multiple models of the architecture. So here is transport, and here is the specification of those same values. I click on any of these, I can go to the details. So stakeholders, ancient stakes, can have stakes in several different values at once, and they can have different interests from in a value, for example, like security, from other stakeholders, which may have a very different interest in security. So it's tricky. So we need some kind of language and well-organized structure so we can deal with it all in large, complex systems. If you have only one user, you're going to program something for a week. You don't need all this, but if you have 100 stakeholders and 100 values and 100 architecture ideas, and they're all mixed together, you need a way of organizing it. That's what this tool is. So here, just to repeat it, here we have 3 different ideas for improvement, and they impact the stay healthy goal, which impacts, looks like, 2 different stakeholders. If you want more control over complex and large-scale systems, and those are the ones we seem to have worse control over and need better control, then the relationship between all of our design solutions, architects, and strategies, and all of our qualities needs to be something we quantify, first by estimating it, then by measuring it incrementally, and then by looking at whether we have achieved it in the long term. So here's another impact estimation table with a little bit more detail. I'm going to go through all elements of it in detail, but here, more readably, here are a set of requirements like healthy employees and education. Here are a number of the tags or names of various strategies for getting there, okay? And here are the estimates of how good these are. And here we're just using the percentage. So transport architecture gets us 50% of the way between the 50 and the 90 in collect information. There's not enough detail to know everything about this right here, but we can click on it, or we can ask the table to be filled out with more details, you'll see later. So here we have a multi-architecture, multi-quality table, and we're getting some picture of, lots of good little bars here that are healthily filled out. Question mark means nobody has made an estimate. And that means it could be very, very, very good, but it could be horrid, as they say about the little girl with her curl in her forehead, and we don't know. So this is also a known unknown. And before making serious decisions to use the health architecture, I would dearly love to pressure people to make some kind of an estimate, however primitive, rather than having a known unknown. Okay. You also notice that we've summed up these numbers to get a sum of, if we did all of the architectures, how might it be? And we've summed the architecture influence on all of the values, all of the qualities, and all of the two costs. And we get a value to cost ratio, where this little baby here is pointed out as 40.70 as the best single value to cost architecture, if you don't consider the worst case, the credibility and things like that, which we'll get to later in the talk. So, okay, now, so summary here is we can deal with many designs, no upper limit. In practice, 10 at any one level would probably be what we're practicing, and we can have multi-level tables here, by the way, decomposing any of the most complex systems. For example, I've done the US Army and US Navy as large systems, and the entire UN Sustainability Initiative for the whole world using these methods. So you can tackle some pretty complex big systems with it. And then many designs on many values and many costs is what we can summarize in a table. One of my good friends used this at the Department of Energy in planning Brexit with regard to energy, and people fell in love with it because this incredibly complex thing, what happens with energy when we do Brexit, could be summarized for the minister, etc., on one single page. They like the idea that this does it on one slide, and you can break it down into more detail if you want to. In addition, we can take the sums of how good each strategy is, which is here, and the sums of the costs, and put them into some kind of a bar chart, which in a sense, in a simple way, sums up the various options for, let's say, management presentation. Why are we choosing this one over this one, kind of thinking or prioritization? Okay, there's more detail of that. But the point is, once you've got numbers, you can, in any spreadsheet, you don't need the app to do this, you can summarize how good things are for purposes of discussion. And then you can decompose this by going back to the table, and you can go back to any part of the table and get more and more detail if you want to analyze, justify, or present ideas there. So there are some principles of impact estimation tables. I love principles. I think I have at least 2 different ones here, and not enough time. If I were to begin to go through these, I'd use 1 minute each, and that would take 10 minutes, and we can't do it. But the major principle is you will get better insight and project control if you estimate impacts early rather than discover bad impacts too late. Now, here is a free copy of the booklet on value impact estimation. And in English, to vie for something means striving for superiority. I like that. And of course, French translation is life, value impact estimation tables. Now, if we click on an intersection between a strategy and a value, we get open a window and we get more detail. And I'm going to go through that detail. I'll take one run through it, but what is hidden here is the fact that we have asked people to estimate the uncertainty. In other words, -7 plus or -3 gives us a range. And we have shown that nobody has measured the actual results in an increment yet. That the credibility of our estimates is very high, 0.8 with in-house measurements. And this is really just a summary of the evidence. We have measured it and the source of the evidence. So we aren't just throwing out nice numbers and hoping people will be fooled into believing them. We can actually audit the quality of the numerics. And we're very keen that people admit that they really haven't got a clue when they really haven't got a clue. And those who architects you have who really do know what they're doing and know a lot about their architecture and can back it up with evidence, those are good people you should hire as your architects. Architects who don't know how their architecture influences your critical goals are not worth anything. You might as well use GPT, artificial intelligence, to generate the ideas. So again, here's we have 2 different scales of measure floating around here. One I've introduced, which is the percentage of the way to the goal, but we also find it useful to have what we call the real number on the real scale of measure. And they both have their mission in life. They really are like centigrade and Fahrenheit. They're just 2 different ways of saying exactly the same thing. And if I could have just one of them, I'd be very happy bunny, but I found that I have to have both of them for different purposes. Here, again, too detailed to go through in more detail, but it is detail from the competitive engineering book, which I just offered a free digital copy of in figure 9.7. And so here in one cell, now a cell is the intersection between a design idea and a quality, for example. We have the real number, 600 hours. We have this artificial scale, 50% of the way towards the goal. We have the plus minus uncertainty. We have the evidence. We have the source of the evidence, and we have the credibility. In other words, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different classes of information in every intersection on the table. And this does a whole lot of different useful things, which I will present partly here and partly you're going to have to read about it. Now here, the main reason for having percentage rather than real scales is if you have 5 different real scales, those scales of measure are all different. Seconds and bits per second and the people who prefer this, and you can't add them up. It makes no sense whatsoever. The moment we convert the real scale into percentage, a certain amount of adding up makes a certain amount of sense. So I can add up percentages to give me a sort of total. If I were to do all of these strategies, approximately how much power or effect do I have? If I were to look at all the impacts on all of the goals and costs, I can get an approximate sum, an approximate idea of the relative power. So I'm using the percentage to get relative power of sets of ideas. That's why it's there and why I can't get rid of it. But I need the real scale to relate to the real world in terms that people directly understand. Okay, so here we are summing the many values for the health architecture and getting a sum of values idea. Here we are summing the many architectures and getting a, if we were to do all of these architectures, how powerful are we? By the way, the green means we have enough safety factor to feel quite comfortable, and the red means we don't have enough safety factor, or safety margin, which engineers call it. There's a danger that we will not reach our goals unless we have a little bit more design in reserve to use if the increments don't really reach our goal yet. So enough of that. Little bit more detail. Here again, we're clicking on an intersection and we have access to a whole lot of more detail of this. If you put all of this detail into each of these things, the table would look very messy. I just picked up an old book by Richard Feynman, which I may have read 20, 30 years ago, but I'm going to read it again. It's on my coffee table right now. Love Richard. If you don't know him, get to know him, just Google him, listen to a video. But I can live with doubt and uncertainty. I think it's much more interesting to live not knowing than to have answers, which might be wrong. The guy is lovely. So the evidence, when I ask people to give evidence, it's amazing how often people give something which I wouldn't call evidence, like Microsoft does it. Is that evidence for how well it works? No. Do you know what evidence is? I mean, could you process this as criminal evidence in a court of law or scientific evidence? See? So it's amazing how many well-educated people we have who really don't understand the concept of evidence. And I sometimes wonder what kind of education they had, because I think all academic educations ought to at least, mine did, and it was in sociology, with people like Emil Durkheim giving evidence for different classes of suicide in the 1800s. So that was pretty fundamental to the study. So, but as soon as I explain to people, evidence is like how much happened when you did it, how often did you do it, what was the process for measurement, that kind of thing. You know, put some numbers in there. Don't just say Google did it. That's for children. Here is our friend Socrates. To believe without evidence and demonstration. Think of that demonstration as the agile increment which you measure to see if your estimates are on track. To believe without evidence and demonstration is an act of ignorance and folly. Gee, I never thought of Socrates as an agile guy, but he clearly is. So let's see, just wondering how I can, there we go, okay. Now, the source idea. So giving evidence is one thing, but what if somebody wants to audit you or review you or challenge you? And my first question is, fine, exactly where did you get the evidence? You know, which scientific study is it published in? Give me a link so I can read the whole paper kind of attitude. So I'm fanatic on sources. I want to know the source of every specification. Who did it? Where did it come from? So that I can quality control. Yeah, I can have independent people doing quality control, okay? So I don't accept just evidence, however good it looks with all kinds of numbers and things like that. I want to go there myself, and if it's something more than a sentence, I want to say, aha, that evidence is not valid in our industry or our case. That was air traffic control. We are selling hot dogs. Okay, that kind of thing. So just pointing out source of evidence. Here we have Bertrand, and little claim to fame here. I once went on a campaign for a nuclear disarmament march in London where he headed it. I think. I don't have any evidence to prove it. I wish I had some photographs of that. Anyway, the fact that an opinion has been widely held, like agile is good for you, is no evidence whatsoever that it is not utterly absurd. Oh, go for it, Bertrand. And then Margaret McCartney, bless her, ignoring evidence leads to avoidable harm. And failing to admit our uncertainties means we don't get better evidence. Wonderful, Margaret. Maybe we should have her hold a talk. Margaret. Okay. So, years ago, we needed to try to find a way of summarizing how good is the evidence and the source. And we came up with this table, actually at Medtronic. I'm just talking with a fellow, I hope he's here, Tom. I saw Tom come in from Medtronic in Berlin. And we actually invented this scale at Medtronic in Minnesota. And we said, well, if the evidence and the source are so bad that it really amounts to a wild guess, engineers talk about scientific wild-assed guesses, swags. It has no credibility. But if we move up the scale, if the evidence is such that there's no doubt that this strategy of yours is going to work exactly as predicted on the day, without any doubt, then you get perfect credibility. And so we rate the evidence. Now, since we don't have enough artificial intelligence yet, we have to do this, translate the evidence and the, it's almost like self-examination. People have to set their own level they're claiming. But again, a review can point out that they keep on setting levels of 9 and 10 when the reality is down here and they're cheating. So, but anyway, we get a number, and the number can be used, for example, if you have a 10 by 10 table, 10 strategies by 10 qualities, you'll have 100 10 by 10 of these, okay? And we can then actually sum up the average credibility of the whole thing, to make a long story short. And if you're making a management presentation, and you have a presentation with average credibility 0.1, and an outside consultant has a competitive presentation with 0.9, and it can be verified by reviews, well, you lose. Management's going to choose the surer plot. So in the tool, we simply set the slider bar to the level and hope that people aren't sliding it too far to the right. Okay. Let's see how we're doing on time. Pretty good, actually. So, yep. And let's see. Need to, okay. So here is a little bit more detail. Here we have the values estimated for the transport architecture on our different qualities. And then we're adding them up, the 50 and 57 and 53, and we get 244, okay? Now you can see that 244 isn't very much different from 235 or 241. The other architecture is done, in fact, by other teams working in parallel. I've done BCS courses for donkey's years where we do this. Many of my illustrations are from those courses, but this one's from Norway. Just before COVID, as I said. But the health architecture ain't so hot, partly because it has very low benefits here, and partly because we score unknown benefits at 0. So you're not getting it, but who knows, maybe these are almost 100%, but we haven't scored them. So for the moment, this gets a very low rating, you know, about order of magnitude worse than these. So if I had a choice, you can do this, this, or this, I'd say doesn't much matter. one detail, wonder how much it costs. And then what we find is this is relatively high cost, the others about the same. And it turns out value to cost ratio of transport architecture is the best. So from the point of view of value for money, somebody says which one to do first. I try the transport architecture. This is computing your priority based on impact for value for money or impact for costs. So made that point really. Okay, and so here's the same thing for the costs. Here we have two different types of costs, doesn't matter what they are, but we're forcing ourselves to think about, for example, life cycle cost, short-term cost, long-term cost. Anything we've learned is really important for us to think about. And here are the relative numbers for costs, which are a rough approximation, but I'm guessing the one at 25% of costs is probably a lot less than 122. Could be, that's not true, but you have to analyze these. But it gives us an overall long-term multi-dimensional cost figure to work with by adding up the costs. This model is not a perfect model. Now, problem with perfect models is they take infinite time and cost to work out. And by that time, your competitor has thrashed you on the market. So the impact estimation table is consciously designed to be quick and dirty. That is, we normally do impact estimation tables in one day to present to a management meeting, okay? You can use more time if it's very important that it's incredibly credible for the managers, a few more days, one person. But they're designed to be quick and dirty. And then if managers say, well, on that basis, I accept us going with this architecture or something like that, because the difference is glaringly high. But the manager might say, these are so close, I'd like you to spend more time going in more detail in these areas, and you can do it. But long story short, it is designed to be quick and dirty. I often derive a model from my requirements and my cost requirements and my strategies in the space of 1 hour using a spreadsheet or the ValPlan tool. So, and that turns out in practice to be acceptable to top managers like brigadier generals and people like that. They're quite happy with it. They're quite astounded, the top brass. They've never seen anything as clear as this, as they often put it to us. Here's the idea of adding up, if we were going to do this architecture and this one and this one and this one, how do they add up? Okay, and again, this is a very rough approximation technique. It is not true that they add up arithmetically, but we hope it is roughly true and gives us a rough picture of where we are roughly, so we can have some interesting discussions. Okay, so back to the idea that we have a simplified engineering model, and remember, all engineering and very much of science is simplified models, not perfect models. And what we're trying to do is what Musk talks about is gradually reducing the error of the requirement or the quality requirement to be less wrong, as Musk puts it. I have a booklet called Musk's Methods. I will happily send to anybody who requests it for free. And that's his #1 principle. Assume the requirements are wrong, and he has numeric requirements, and but try to make them less wrong, gradually learning the truth by agile feedback, allowing you to adjust your estimates. Okay, we're not trying to predict an exact outcome. We can't, but we're trying to predict approximate outcomes better than just saying Microsoft does it, therefore we will do it. That method is crude for serious systems like your national health system. Are we doing on time? Yeah. I won't go too detailed into this, but the uncertainty numbers can be brought in at the detailed level if we want to accumulate uncertainty. Enough of that, enough of that, and enough of that to save time. Now, down at the bottom of the table here, we've done a basic sum of values over sum of costs. So, and we've computed the value to cost ratio, right? We've also highlighted automatically the highest value to cost ratio, so we can sort of start talking about this one seriously. But in addition, when you have a number like 7 plus or minus 3, that indicates it's a range of 4 to 10, right? And the worst case is 4. So if we use that plus minus uncertainty to compute the worst case for everything, in other words, if everything goes badly, we get a different computation. And it turns out that this baby here, if everything goes wrong, is the best design to use. Now, management is in principle risk adverse. They don't want to lose their high-paying jobs or their reputation. So management likes to know what the risk is, and it doesn't hurt to compute it in a systematic way that can be reviewed and proven to be reasonable. And so suddenly have a discussion to say, well, this option looks good on the surface of it, but if we were to assume Murphy's law, if anything can happen at the worst possible moment, it will, then this baby here is bad. By the way, if we were to look at the credibility factor, remember 0, no credibility, bad estimate, 1.0, perfect credibility, and multiply that times everything, then it turns out this option is also the best option, okay? But if we were to combine the worst case and the credibility, I call it worst case, then it turns out this option is the best one. If nothing else, this gives interesting discussions on whose strategy is, what does it mean to have a best design or strategy for qualities? Okay, enough of that. Now, as I hinted, and I'm going to make it explicit now, if you can compute these numbers, you can simply tell the spreadsheet to sort these in sequence for a variety of factors. I can sort them in sequence for the values to hell with the costs. I'm feeling rich. And sometimes when I'm feeling very, very rich, I am cost insensitive, okay? I just sold my flat in London for a hell of a lot of money, and I walked into an Apple shop and I couldn't care less what it cost. I wanted the best Apple product, okay? But there was a time when I did look at what these expensive things cost in relation to eating and paying the rent and things like that. Okay, now, but we can, for example, say, sort them in the sequence of the raw value to cost. But we can also say, sort them for all possible risks that we're looking at. And so this one goes first. This is the value to cost level. It's slightly better than this. So if we have a political fight here and this one is politically powerful, we might do this one first, in spite of the fact it's slightly less value to cost. But it's a toss-up, you might say. They're close enough. But there's no good reason for doing this one, which is significantly lower. So by the way, this is automatic sequencing of sprints. You don't need a product owner to give you advice about it. You compute the sequence based on rational thinking about data and facts about the set of qualities and values over the set of costs with regard to the set of risks. Now we're talking rational thinking and engineering, which is appropriate for large systems like the National Health System or the Ministry of Defense and things like that. The table in many ways resembles chess. I'll let you think about it, but it's a very nice analogy. One of the things we're trying to do in chess is find the priority of the next move with regard to a multiplicity of possibilities. Now here we have, I've tried to be fair. I've sold the idea of how wonderful this is. Wouldn't I? But I also believe that if I'm to be fair, I have to list all the limitations and problems with the method. So I've done it here. It's the same problem as with any model. It's imperfect. So the summarizing, it's a simplified model. And but the strength, so it can be wrong, and it can be, but hopefully, like Musk, it becomes less wrong as you feed feedback into it to adjust your numbers, which we do. Okay, there's a case study from Quantifying in Norway, which does that brilliantly in practice for the world market. Ask me for the study from Quantifying to show how feeding back information into the model helps it work better. And but its strength is that it's quantified, it is structured and clearly defined ideas, and it's transparent. Okay, and transparency is something that, well, we're at least interested in it with regard to decisions made by artificial intelligence models. This is, in fact, potentially an artificial intelligence model. We are working in that direction. Here we have some various short-term objectives and long-term objectives. And here we have the tracking. This must be week by week progress. We can see that on this incline, there is no hope of meeting the short-term goals. But we might have a good chance of meeting some of the long-term goals. This is just real quick, built into the tool to track things and show it against the planned levels. We have a thing called a meter, which is really the test process. And sometimes I call it that, the test process design. And what we do is we decide how are we going to measure at agile sprints or increments, how we're going to measure in turning the system over to the major customer for the first time, how are we going to measure in operation for the system. In listening to the Tesla Investor Day 4-hour, 3-hour, 45-minute video from Musk and his gang, which is very, very interesting and revealing. They have two statements I like, and one is that they are metrics fanatics, and that's one reason they're so successful. And the other is they are clearly not just fanatics at estimating, they're fanatics at measurement in operation during the car assembly, after the car is on the road, sending the data from 1 million cars back to headquarters every day, including from my Model 3. So if you want to look at a gang of fanatics on measurement and quantification in all dimensions, look to Tesla. I think Musk is the greatest agile practitioner on the planet. Remember, I mentioned a free book you can get called Musk Methods, where I tried to collect all his ideas. So here we have another specification of the meter in my planning language. So scale of measure is just defining the idea, and the meter defines one or more different test processes in different situations and for different purposes. And we are 3 minutes from the hour where I sort of hope to be done. We can summarize. Some basic applications are these 4: comparing complex options, making decisions. For architecture, building a total architecture. See my free If You Ask Me book, Systems Engineering Architecture, the C book. And managing a project or project management. And presenting complex systems and selling them to the people who are going to pay for them. Here's a longer list. Every one of these is things we did in practice as we were beginning to invent and the impact estimation table. So it's a list of 20 different types of applications. So you can use it for a whole lot of stuff. If you just have one thing that's very, very important for you, here that might be reason enough to start playing with the table. Here are the principles again, but the some trying to bring the bar down without unmuting myself. Any solution's effectiveness can be quantified for any critical stakeholder value, meaning all qualities. And so when we're talking about architecture, strategies, and solutions, we ought to consider going the impact estimation route to put our case and to force people to think systematically and rationally. So that's it. End of talk. Ready for questions. I will point out that I have an awful lot of references here to free booklets, mainly. If you find a booklet with a paywall you can't afford, and it's mine, if you're a poor student or you're from Ukraine, just ask. You'll get a free copy from me. Papers, slides, videos, and things like that. Okay.